Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today, we have Jeffrey Scholz, founder of RareSkills.io, a remote-only Web3 bootcamp focused on transforming junior Web3 engineers into senior one. Jeffrey, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm excited to learn about your background, your experience, and not only, what you're doing at RareSkills, but what you've done in your past and previous experiences that is really inspiring to me as a founder as well, and in terms of the educational component that you're now kind of focusing on. But before we get into all that good stuff, when did you first get into machine learning? Tell me the story behind that, because I know you've been within the technology and working with this technology for a while now, but tell me a little bit about, how you first got into machine learning in particular.
Sure. I kind of got dragged into it. When I joined Yahoo, I joined as a normal backend engineer coming out of Columbia. So back there, I studied theoretical computer science, which is something pretty hard to get a job in. So I became a regular backend engineer. My boss at the time, he was ahead of the curve, to be honest. So he noticed that some momentum was starting to pick up in machine learning. So this was 2016, and machine learning was making some waves in the academic world, but not too much in the real world yet. So he said, okay, guys, let's start building out machine learning products for video. Specifically, we had worked on APIs for serving video, but didn't really use any deep learning to help with ranking the videos or anything like that. So he said, okay, guys, we're going to do this. And I was kind of skeptical at first because there's this joke like, oh, I want to build an app. And I'm like, okay, if it's in a park, it'll tell me where I am. Okay, great. I'll use the GPS coordinates. And when I pointed at a bird, I want to tell me what kind of bird it's going to be. Oh, that'll take me 5 years. So we still had this, I still had this impression back then that these things are too difficult for machine learning. And now there's Chat GPT, how fast things change, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was totally up to him. And I followed along and it paid off.
Yeah. For those who don't know, describe the relationship between AI and ML.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it depends on who you're talking to, but I tend to consider them the same thing. Some people will say AI is a more general form of ML, but I use them interchangeably.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess at your time at Yahoo, you were there for like 6 years, and tell me about what I like to ask a lot of founders who worked at larger companies is, what are some companies like Yahoo doing right? And did you take any of those lessons that you learned from that larger organization into, founding companies? I know there's a couple companies that you founded previously, but in particular, what were they doing right, and what did you learn from that experience?
Yep. Well, definitely the most important takeaway that I took was these large companies in Silicon Valley they don't advertise it, but they have a built-in mentorship model where you're working on a relatively small team generally under the guide of a very experienced engineer. And at least once a week, you'll be meeting one-on-one with the engineer who will be doing code reviews with you. Now, the purpose of these code reviews is for quality assurance. They don't want junior engineers pushing bad code into production. But the effect of it is that people learn very fast because the way to learn quickly is to get feedback on what you're doing wrong so that you can correct it as soon as possible, right? But so that's what ends up happening, even though that might not be the primary intent. Yeah. So that heavily informed how I run RareSkills nowadays. The one-on-one component is very important to me. And that's what I get the feedback on. So, I mean, it is good to learn about how to have good processes like that. But that's the one that I think ended up having an effect on me the longest.
Yeah. Yeah. And what are some things that, larger companies, I guess, inherently can't do that, you can do as a startup?
Hire contractors overseas for random stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, without being able to pay someone relatively cheaply to like edit videos and stuff, there would not be enough time in the day. What can a smaller company do more easily that a big company can't? I mean, I don't know if I have any additional insight on it, but a lot of people know you can be more agile as a small company, right? You can form partnerships faster. You can sign deals quicker. If your strategy is not working, you can adjust it faster without committee. I mean, I'm sure most of your listeners already know this, but definitely true. I've experienced it firsthand.
Yeah. And, can think about your background and your experience. What initially inspired you to start RareSkills? And was it the first stop in your founder journey, or was there more to kind of creating, the company and behind it? And when did you, initially decide, okay, it's time to take the leap into RareSkills and really invest all your time and effort into it?
Yeah. I mean, I'd been doing consulting for part-time since I'd say 2018 for different startups. So RareSkills is still ultimately selling expertise, right? This student comes in, an engineer who wants to have access to that kind of senior mentorship that I was describing earlier. And so having a person-to-person kind of service wasn't new to me, but in terms of taking the plunge, I mean, I don't know if there was ever a point where it came, okay, it's time to take the plunge. It's just more like, okay, we're getting traction, so let's push this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I do other kinds of consulting too. Like I'm a fractional CTO for a couple of companies, but RareSkills definitely takes up the most time. Yeah. And I do feel like I've seen definitely a much better market fit with it than other forms of consulting I've done. A much better product market fit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to get into RareSkills and kind of the, the structure and mechanics behind what it is, but real quickly on the consulting piece, super fascinated to kind of dive into this because, a lot of companies and a lot of founders that I speak with, they don't have necessarily a CTO or engineering, structure to where feel that they can kind of maximize their efficacy of their engineering team. What do you see that a lot of companies are needing to improve upon in their structure, and how are you helping them improve on that within the engineering motion?
Right. I would, in terms of helping, say, non-technical founders manage their engineering best, I'd say probably the most important component is communication and expectations. Like, I want the app to be built by this certain day and I want it to have a certain quality. Well, that's not realistic. Or, I mean, sometimes engineers, if they know that they have an asymmetric information advantage, they can take advantage of that. Like, no, you guys are pulling our legs, work harder. So I would say it's just largely being a translator who understands, human intentions to a certain degree. So here's where the engineers are coming from. This is what their priorities are. This is where the founder's coming from. This is what his or her priorities are. And trying to reconcile the two.
How do you set better expectations as a founder? If it's not, this is what I need it to look like by this date, is it going more granular into what you need the particular functions to have, maybe making a more clear roadmap? What in particular do you think or would be in terms of setting expectations?
Right. Well, I mean, you always have to start with prioritizing business needs, right? Because, I mean, I love the engineers, but if the business isn't working and nobody has a job, right? So when the founder is saying, hey, this is the direction I want to take, I want this done. You mean, first thing is, okay, first of all, you need to tell me what the highest priority, and, because you're not going to be able to get everything you want all the time. Yeah. And then on the engineering side, it's like, okay, now which of these tasks are going to take the longest and the shortest? Because the shorter tasks, ideally, we want to prioritize, because the sooner a task is done, the sooner you get business value out of it. So you're trying to reconcile which tasks are the easiest to finish with which tasks are the most important, and then prioritizing that way. Now, maybe some tasks have dependencies and you have to make exceptions, but if I were to put it into a simple framework, that's how I would describe it. That's not handling every consideration, but
sure.
I think if I were to summarize it quickly, that would be it.
Yeah. And shifting now to RareSkills, what it particularly, I guess, inspired the idea to start, upskilling developers, in particular Web3. Obviously, I see it as a founder who works with a lot of Web3 startups, needing essentially skilled Web3 developers, but it's either that they're too skilled and too expensive, or they just come out of a bootcamp and maybe don't even have structural foundational knowledge within the software development process or good habits in the process. So what inspired you to, go into this skills training function, but also what in particular did you see the gap in other boot camps alike?
Sure. Yeah. No, this is a good question, because back at Yahoo, I really was a strong believer in upskilling developers, because let's say you make a developer 20% better at something. I mean, during 2020 to 21, people were having 20% salary increases, but normally the engineers don't get a 20% salary increase year over year. And so you get 20% more productivity for a 5-10% increase in salary, then that's good business, right?
Yeah.
So I would make sure each developer spend at least an hour a day working on upskilling, which that's a fairly big investment, right? Supposedly the time committed is 8 hours. So you're spending 12% of your time on a very long-term investment. But I think it paid off. I mean, I became the youngest senior manager at Yahoo at the time. So and then I was in charge of some very big partnerships. So I like to think I was making the right choices, or at least they were validated. So that experience definitely instilled in me the value. It's really important to make the people who are working for you more skilled. Andrew Grove, High Output Management, says, the only two levers you can really pull are motivation and training. That's what's going to determine the productivity. And okay, so motivation is one aspect, but training, I think, is something that is oftentimes left to chance. Like, okay, with enough time, you're going to learn by osmosis. But if you have a strategy, then of course you're going to do better than random chance, or at least you're paying attention to what's working and what's not. And you're setting goals for where do I want you, this newer engineer, to be in 1, 2, 3 years. And so if you're deliberate and intentional about it, then you can get some really great results. And I honestly think that this is something that a lot of engineering managers undervalue. So, because if you look at it in the short term, like, wow, we just lost an hour each day. This is a real cost, but you don't see, okay, well, the benefit will come if you stick with it for, 6 months.
Yeah.
So you feel the pain in the short term, but you get the thing in the long term. I guess I really have a lot of faith that in the long term it will pay off. So in terms of RareSkills, so at work, we operate only in the Web3 space right now, but just in general, I've noticed that during the machine learning hype cycle, there was a machine learning hype cycle around 2018 or so, in 2017, 2018, 2019. And there were a lot of these relatively junior engineers. They would go on some web platform, take a course, and send an application to work on my team. And it got kind of frustrating after a while. Like, dude, you have the same resume as everybody else. You've worked on exactly the same project. And I've taken that course. It's wonderful, but I know you have a lot of knowledge gaps.
Yeah.
And I could see these other courses popping up, like, if you become a machine learning engineer, you're going to make 6 figures now. Now pay $39 to take our course and then watch our videos and pass our quizzes. And I'm like, I will definitely not give you a job if you have that, because that certificate is all that you have. So that really grinded my gears back in the day. And then I saw the same thing happen again with Web3, where it was very much, take this course and we'll get a great career afterwards, making $100,000 or whatever. Which, okay, first of all, is silly because engineers generally make $100,000 if you're good. So like, what's so special about learning blockchain if you're going to earn the same amount or less? So I felt like that was a bit of some silly advertising. But it was also this really big disconnect between the expectations of what it takes to get the skill to be really productive and a really valuable contributor and what people were saying the effort that it takes. Because upskilled engineers, from someone who didn't know anything about machine learning to people who were making very valuable contributions, it's a long and hard journey. And these people were already coming in prepared. But I do believe that people are out there who really, hey, if you show me how to make the journey, I'll make the journey. And I've seen that. One of my students had no blockchain background and got a job offer at one of the most prestigious auditing firms. So it took him like 4 months of really intense work to get there. And it was more than a part-time job studying under the program I put him through. But the journey is doable, but it's not, oh, here, complete some assignments and get a certificate. So I think giving people the option of, okay, look, I know what the journey's like. I've done it myself. I've helped other people go through it. If you want to take it, here it is. And I'm not, the scale is an issue because it takes a lot of effort to help people get to that point. But I think that's the problem that can be figured out later.
Yeah. How do you screen for having that? I don't know if it's a personality or attributes of individuals. A lot of founders, I think, struggle with, they would love to have the person, they would love to pay for a junior engineer who they knew they can invest a lot into and become a part of their team. But the default is to go with somebody more senior, experienced, because of you mitigate some risk, but they might be less flexible, or they might be even less polished and have not necessarily the best habits. That's not all senior engineers, of course. But there is the risk involved if you go that route, right? There's the risk on both sides. So how have you been able to identify those attributes well? Is it by experience? Is it by some certain methodology? What in particular gives you the confidence when you're selecting someone as a student or as a hire?
Well, as a hire, it's working for a company that's funded well. You have the luxury of just, I'm going to de-risk it and go for someone who has a good track record and I think will do well.
Yeah.
So we would just put the coding, if you have the right kind of coding tests, it's pretty accurate, I would say. You can forecast someone's skill level pretty darn well. Maybe you can't forecast their motivation, but in terms of whether or not they're capable of doing the job, the coding tests are pretty objective if done right. In terms of the student motivation, that one, well, we do require a certain amount of technical maturity coming in. That is, people do have to go through a coding test also, because I want to see, are you able to get a regular software job? If not, then getting a Web3 software job is just going to make it more complicated.
Yeah.
But in terms of motivation, I mean, part of it's intuitive, so I couldn't really tell you. I mean, how do you distinguish between someone who's just, everyone's excited about Web3 even now after the prices have crashed. So I just want to ride the wave versus this is something that I really want to do. I don't know if I could describe exactly what is the distinguishing feature between those two, but you can kind of talk to people and get a pretty good sense of it. Now, I don't know if I could turn this into a systematic process. And there are a couple students I've taken on who turned out to be less motivated than I had hoped. So it's not a perfect one, but if you ask people, hey, what is your motivation? Most of the time people are, if they say something about being like curious for the purpose of knowledge, that's usually a really good tell. Like, oh, I don't want to be left behind. So they're kind of just motivated by fear. That's not going to sustain you through the long journey. You might just go through the journey, man, I'm a loser, I'm going to get left behind anyway. Versus I really want to learn new and interesting subjects, and that makes me excited. So in those kind of people, no matter how much you challenge, the more you challenge them, the more excited they get. So that's what, the harder the journey get, the more fuel they put into the rocket, and the better they do. So those are the kind of people that I try to select for.
Yeah, it makes sense. What advice would you give, I guess, engineers looking to work in either blockchain or machine learning or anything that requires a certain level of an investment? Outside of, I know you mentioned just consistent learning over time would just, develop into just dividends, but what other advice would you give them?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I mean, you definitely hit on the most important one. If you love learning for its own sake, then being in new fields will be exciting for you because there's always a lot to learn and it changes fast. And the tutorials are not that great. So you'll have to, if you're the sort of person who's just stubborn and is determined to figure it out even when you don't have the solution, then that's great. If you're working in a field that is going through a hype cycle, you definitely have to keep both eyes open about who you partner with and who you work for and what kind of partnership, like business partnerships and you have and whatever, because some people are there to cash out on other people's excitement, let's just be honest. So watch out for that and find your niche within the subject, I would say, because machine learning is very broad. Even back when I was doing it full time, we had, natural language processing, computer vision, different kind of forecasting stuff. You can't be good at all of them. You have to pick one. So within the field of blockchain, there's security, there's decentralized finance, there's, building like NFT communities. These are all different fields that you can specialize in, and I haven't listed them all. I mostly focus on low-level programming and the actual, the runtime in which smart contracts are executed. So it's just a subfield of, it's just a computer science subject that's very relevant in blockchain. Now I study other things, but that's primarily it, like the consensus algorithms and the actual executions of the smart contract. And focusing on that is the blockchain field, when you have a new field, like here, imagine this is all of the backend and front-end engineers. This would be like machine learning and blockchain. And then here's the niche within inside of that. So when you pick your niche, it's easy to be the expert in it because nobody else is doing it because you're smarter than everybody else. Yeah. So find a niche and get good at it.
Yeah. Yeah. When you talk about this progressive learning over time, what should a developer focus on learning? You talked a little bit, I think earlier you mentioned something about structure within learning, which is super beneficial and the reason why you have positive compounding benefits. But if it's sporadic, I can see how it could be a little bit more convoluted and less productive. But if I'm a developer, what should I be focusing on learning every day? Should I choose a subject and dive into it? What, in your advice, should I focus on?
Yep. Two things. One is, what are you interested in? And three, what knowledge is evergreen and foundational? So it's people like engineers are kind of shocked, to learn that the sorting algorithms that they're quizzed on have been around for decades. So it's like that stuff is not, a lot of computer science is surprisingly old.
Yeah.
And that means that knowledge is not going to go away. So the stuff, I require people in the program to have already a good understanding of algorithms and data structures. And I know a lot of people, that's not a pleasant subject for some people because they associate them with these 45-minute tests, which are very stressful. And I do agree that those tests are badly conducted, but they're not wrong to be conducted, even if the method is wrong.
Yeah.
Because being able to think computationally is going to benefit you in whatever field you pick. Like I joked that I studied a useless major, which was theoretical computer science, but knowing what the first principles of computation are allowed me to learn anything fast afterwards.
Totally. Yeah.
That's how I was able to go from zero to leading a machine learning team at a major company in less than 2 years, and how I was able to create the only expert level blockchain courses on Udemy on the topic of Ethereum programming in a pretty quick amount of time.
Yeah.
Because I had the foundations in place. So if you're in doubt, study the foundational topics.
Yeah.
So you should know about operating systems, networks, compilers, data structures and algorithms. Get the fundamentals right first, and then pick a subject that interests you. And you'll be surprised at how fast you learn it if you learn in the order of first foundations and then your favorite subject.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. What makes you so particularly passionate about upskilling engineers?
I think that's real. Well, many reasons. For one thing, I think the world really needs it. Like there's this, we don't need more software engineers. We need more qualified software engineers. Because it's one thing like, okay, I can follow a tutorial and build an app, but when you're connected with a founder, is it like, okay, I need this problem solved so that the customers get their needs met. If you can't do it, then it doesn't matter if you can code or not. You're not able to create value for people. So you really have to hit a certain threshold first before you can really be a contributor to the company. So I think that's important. And it doesn't stop after that point. Like, when Instagram and WhatsApp were sold to Facebook, the teams were pretty small. So I think it's exciting that a small group of people are able to accomplish a lot if they're very skilled. I think that's what will create value just in a general economic and societal sense. So people need to do that. I mean, in the blockchain space, I think there's definitely a lot of potential for blockchain, but a lot of the technology is very underdeveloped. Yeah. And building another NFT, which is cool, is not going to help because that's not the fundamental problem that needs to be solved. The problem is more stuff around scaling and UX, right? Those are the big issues that we have. So we need people who can really solve that issue, but that means they need to be at the cutting edge they need to go on a journey to the cutting edge of knowledge and then continue to take on a leadership role after that. I think that's what is going to be a much bigger impact versus, okay, let's take you part way through your journey so you can build a couple cool apps here and there.
Yeah. In your opinion, what are going to be the effects now that, I think with COVID and remote working culture, there's such diverse access to not only talent, if you're a company hiring, but also just information generally, especially with blockchain and all these Web3 technologies, creating, even more substantial infrastructure that is inherently decentralized, right? There's less silos or barriers to getting access. What's particularly exciting, or where do you think the world's going to go now that more and more countries, more and more individuals, and there's more, I guess, almost like democracy around getting access to information because there's just more access in general. What's some exciting things, in your opinion, that you're looking forward to?
Well, to be honest, I mean, I don't want to give a negative answer to a positive question, but I think what actually kind of shocks me is with all of the access to information, the shortage of developers still exists, right? Like millions of people have gotten certificates online, but there's still thousands of unfilled jobs. I think it's really important to get the messaging right, that there's a whole lot more to being a developer than taking classes online. Right. That's why I think the human component is still important, which is something that I really emphasize at RareSkills. Like, okay, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire until you build this up to a quality that I think is acceptable, because that is what I know that is going to be required of you in the real world. Passing a quiz is not the same thing as building up a skill that's useful out there. Now, I do think having the knowledge generally available is a really fantastic first step, and I've met some really amazing self-taught programmers. But I mean, I do think the college model is very broken, but it's still the reason why there is a much higher success rate from graduates, from this degree students. They tend to do better coming into the computer science workforce than bootcamp graduates or people who have largely taught themselves, just because being in a structure where we know that this works and we've been knowing that it works for a long time is pretty reliable versus something that has not evolved as much yet. And where the expectations are not clear and there's a lot of hype, like take my course, make a 6-figure salary, which is not good career advice. So I do think that I do think RareSkills is taking it in the next step. Like, yeah, we'll make access to information free, but you also need access to people who are going to mentor you, because Google can't tell you what you misunderstand. And your career advice needs to come from someone who's done it and not from a company's marketing. So that is something that I really look forward to in the future, is just giving engineers rising prospective engineers a more trusted source of, okay, this is what it really is like. You can do it. We're not here to share any bad news, but we want you to work smart and hard. So these are the steps you should be taking.
Yeah.
So I do think I do think we're moving towards that, because the first step is the democratization of information, having people all over the world being able to take on jobs. I do think things are moving in the right direction, but there's still a few crucial steps that need to be taken before we can really unlock all of the potential.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the traction of RareSkills. How many students do you have? How many do you support now? And what are your future growth plans?
Yeah, well, we take on 5 students per class, and way oversubscribed for January. So we split it into 2 classes, and we still have a long line of applicants, but we don't accept most of the students who apply. One thing is because it's just not smart to scale too fast. And 2, I'm very keen about the quality of people that we take in. In terms of the amount, oh gosh, I should know the number off the top of my head. There's about 25 who are in the program right now. And in terms of, yeah, there's a couple more instructors that I'm trying to hire, and I do hope that will allow us to scale. The more important scaling that I want to have is not just having the core course, which is Solidity for Ethereum development, but I want to follow it up on more advanced topics like zero knowledge proof, consensus algorithms, how to actually work on the protocol client, work on another blockchain like Solana, and program in Rust. So I would rather have the students stay with the program for a long time and become very good versus putting a bunch of people through a class or 2. So I guess that wouldn't traditionally be called scaling because you're not bringing on more people, but I mean, you do make more money for one thing, so that still counts as scaling, right? And the engineers, I think the payoff is much higher. I'd rather have one engineer the potential contribution of one engineer who has been seriously well-trained versus 2 engineers who are decently trained. The guy with the ton of training is able to accomplish far more because he knows what the other 2 engineers don't know that they don't know.
I love that. What are some of the biggest risks that RareSkills faces today?
Well, since we only offer Web3 curriculum right now, like what if the market gets even worse and people don't want to just completely lose interest? That's something that keeps me up at night. At some point, I do want to expand beyond Web3, but I don't want to do too many things at once.
Yeah.
So those are, and it is a pretty niche product. So marketing it is hard.
Yeah.
Because for one thing, it's only developers who are interested in Web3. And their first thought might not be to take a bootcamp, because bootcamps do have some kind of a stigma of like, oh, it costs a lot of money and you can learn it online for free anyway, which is frankly true a lot of the time, but that's not what we're trying to offer. You're going to have direct access. You're going to work with someone who's going to personally tailor to you what is best for you and what you need to stay motivated and what your knowledge gaps are. So even just coming up with the wording for how to communicate what exactly the service is challenging. Yeah. I think we definitely made some progress in that, but the primary thing that concerns me is, what if things in Web3 get worse and then by osmosis it affects developer training too? Yeah.
If everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for RareSkills?
To replace college? I guess I'm going to be honest. I mean, apprenticeship used to be the model for how people would upskill themselves. And then for some reason it fell out of favor it didn't actually fall out of favor. College used to be a very boutique thing that only like rich kids would go to learn a very specific set of skills that were relevant to their socioeconomic situation. Right.
Yeah.
But then which is fine, but then I think, somewhere after World War II when the GI Bill came out, then college became a normal thing and people started forcing this model on people that was probably not beneficial. It moved away and people need skills training nowadays. Like, reading Cicero is cool, but it's not a good investment to pay $60,000 to study Cicero and then have a $50,000 salary after that, right? So I do think that the apprenticeship model will make a comeback, just pure because unless colleges can somehow pivot and bring their prices down. But we talked about how big organizations aren't agile earlier, right?
Yeah.
So I do think long term, that is kind of the ultimate North Star.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to ask this next question for our audience, for myself to learn some gems of knowledge, but whether it's early in your career or now, what books or people have influenced you the most?
Okay. Well, if you haven't read High Output Management by Andy Grove, the one I referenced earlier, definitely do yourself a favor. What other books have influenced me? So this entrepreneur, like Felix Dennis, I believe is his name, and he wrote a book called How to Get Rich. So was a very big magazine publisher. There's actually another book by that name, but the guy's name was, I think, Dennis Felix. It could be Felix Dennis, whatever. That's the author. He gave some really raw feedback about what it takes to get a company off of the ground on your own, as well as what it's like to manage people because I thought it was interesting as a manager. Okay, managing engineers is straightforward as long as you're good at technology. But managing managers is tricky. And he gives some really raw feedback about how to do that, which I think was, I thought that was very insightful. And I felt like at the time I was reading that, wow, this guy knows more about me than I know about myself. So just, a typical book with a title of Get Rich or something like that is going to be to the effect of, yeah, just work hard and grind, bro. But that's not, there's way more to it than that.
Yeah.
So any other books? Yeah, I mean, material by Peter Drucker is always going to be good. So
yeah.
If you're wondering if you should pick up a book by him, you definitely should.
Amazing. I love that. Jeffrey, I always like to give my guests a chance to let us, the audience, know where we can support you, where we can find it, and even get involved in RareSkills. So give us your plugs, your LinkedIn's, your websites, your Twitters, where can we be a part of RareSkills? And if we don't make the first cohort, how can we get involved in the next one?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the website is RareSkills.io. We're pretty active on Twitter, RareSkills_IO. And yeah, if you go to the website, you can apply. We run cohorts once a month or once every other month. So I would say if you're not able to join, don't be in a hurry, because you should, if you are not able to start right away, you should have some preparation going in, because we have some professional Solidity developers who join the course. They already have the job programming Solidity, and even they find it to be challenging sometimes. So it's a long journey. Don't worry if you're not able to start right away.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Jeffrey, for being on the show. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I'm excited. I run a community of developers, so I'm excited to share this with the audience as well, as they get an opportunity to learn and develop their skills. And I can't wait to see, as RareSkills progress, the influence it'll have and the impact it'll have on quality development, because talking to founders all the time, that's the biggest issue is fundraising, hiring, and then amongst hiring is hiring quality employees and people to join their team. And so I'm excited to see where things lead. But thank you again for being on the show.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course.